So welcome to our session that has been perhaps a little edgily named the Halal research is out. Can you afford to ignore the numbers? And it's named that really to get people thinking, because this is sort of our global session to kick off the whole summit. So it's going to provide hopefully some overarching background information as to what the industry has looked like and looks like now and possibly will look like in terms of the numbers, the demand, the growth. And then also we're going to talk about hopefully some of the social impacts of the numbers of.
Uh-oh, she froze.
Can you hear me? Or am I?
We can now.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm connected. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You're back.
You can. Okay, great. Then let me continue. So at the top, however, what I'd like to do is thank the sponsors once more and play a sponsor video. And the sponsors for the Halal Expo and Summit are Sharia Wiz, ISWA, Halal, and U.S. Muslim Chamber of Commerce, American Halal Council, Saffron Road, the Standards and Metrology Institute for the Islamic countries, and Americans for Vibrant Palestinian Economy, Halal Watch World, Helping Hand, Guidance Residential, Ibriq Technologies, and H2 Growers. And now play the video.
Okay, one quick tip. If somebody is presenting and also during the video, you can double click on the presenter screen to make it larger than the others. It will not disconnect from the other screens. It will just make one larger than others, and you can go back if you want to. All right. So this is a message from our first sponsor, Sharia Wiz. I'm going to go ahead and play it. If you want to enlarge that screen, you can do that as well.
Assalamu alaikum wassalatu wassalam ala sadiq al-amin. My name is Abid Awad, New York-based Muslim American attorney and founder of Sharia Wiz, an online portal that offers information about the laws of Sharia-compliant wills and Islamic law inheritance. While this is a religious project, it is also egalitarian and progressive at heart, directing the religious faithful to the spirit and core of the Quranic moral framework that commands us to lead an ethical lifestyle. It requires us to consider distributing our estate and attend to end-of-life issues within the Quranic moral framework. The Sharia Wiz estate plan is easy to use. It takes as little as 15 minutes on your computer or smartphone to custom tailor your Sharia-compliant estate plan. After 20 years practicing law, primarily in the Muslim American community, I'm also a trusted global consultant and expert on Sharia and the laws of Muslim-majority countries. So I know the issues around inheritance and family concerns that often are misunderstood by Muslim American families. I've provided legal and business advice to clients all over the world. Along with teaching experience at Pace Law School and Seton Hall Law School, I currently teach Islamic law at Rutgers Law School. I was the U.S. editor and served as a senior contributor at ShariaSource.com and Islamic Legal Studies Project at Harvard Law School for several years. My legal expertise, coupled with my deep, extensive knowledge of Islamic law, gives me a unique understanding of Sharia-compliant solutions. And knowing the Sharia system as a methodology to produce knowledge and a moral guide, I was confident I would find equitable solutions in the Sharia tradition to address everyone's concerns. And that's exactly the purpose of Sharia Wiz, to provide real solutions for Muslim Americans and at a reasonable and affordable price. Our automated software solutions gives you the power to custom tailor a Sharia-compliant estate plan easily, including a will, healthcare directive, organ donation form, and power of attorney. We've also included a cutting-edge calculator, which calculates your estate according to Islamic inheritance rules free of charge. By creating a Sharia-compliant estate plan, you're exercising your faith while at the same time protecting your faith. So what are you waiting for? Visit us at our website today and plan for the future. Protect your family's future.
All right, very good. Thank you, Maradwan. Thank you, Abed. So with this, let me just give the roadmap here, just for the folks who are listening in. We're going to, each speaker in our sessions will basically give some remarks, and then each session is 50 minutes. So they'll have time for remarks, and hopefully we'll keep about 20 minutes for Q&A. And the Q&A you can put into the chat to the right of the screen here. And feel free to add a question anytime. I will be trying to monitor that as we go through, and we'll address the questions at the end. And as I said, each session is 50 minutes, and each one is typically activated 5 minutes before it starts, but I think actually they're being activated at the start. So what I would also request of our speakers, anybody who has a mic who's not talking, if you wouldn't mind muting, that will be less distracting in case there's any noise at your end. So without further ado, let me introduce our amazing speakers here today. It's really great to have you both for this edgy panel. Quentin Gray is the president and CEO of Q Gray and Associates. He's had more than 30 years experience helping US companies market their food products in at least 3 continents, Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, while he served as an agricultural counselor for various US embassies in those regions. He currently serves on advisory committees at Virginia International University and North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University. And Quentin, you are coming from us from where?
From Arlington,
Coming
Virginia
to us from
today.
Arlington, Virginia.
Close to Washington,
Okay, that's
D.C., for those of you who don't know the U.S. geography.
right. As a matter of fact, I just moved here from Arlington, Virginia in December in Morocco.
All right.
All right. Well, take it away, Quentin.
Okay, let me, first of all, I'm going to pull my presentation up in a moment, but I understand that when I start my presentation, you won't be able to see me in the presentation at the same time. At least that's what I think. Perhaps you will. But I want to talk a little bit about the demand for halal products in the world. And I want to first tell you my story about how I got involved with halal. I was the agricultural trade officer in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And one of my first memories of ever hearing the word halal was at a conference that the government, the Saudi Arabia government, had put on about halal. And I'll never forget the conversation about stunning versus not stunning. And, you know, it was just, for me, it was just totally strange. And little did I know that for the next 20 or so years, I would be involved with the issue of halal almost every day in what I do. I focus my career in the Middle East and Africa. And as you know, there's a large Muslim population in that whole region, those 2 regions. And so I learned a lot about halal. And as a consultant, I've been working with companies, US companies, helping them to promote their products in the Middle East. So I'm still involved with halal. So with that said, I'm going to pull up my presentation. Let's hope it works. And then application. 1 second. Let me find it. This is the technology part. Let's hope we get it right. Which I don't see it. I do not see it, but 1 second. I can talk as I look. Well, I might have to speak from memory because I surely don't see it again.
I don't think that will be a bad thing with all your anecdotal evidence.
Okay. So you'll get a copy of my presentation if you want it. But I'm going to speak from my mind, which is probably going to be a better presentation because sometimes when you don't have prepared remarks, it's really good. You can actually do a great job. First of all, 20, 30 years ago, I call those the old days. The halal was more or less an issue that involved Muslim countries, and the trade of halal products were between Muslim countries, and those countries were trading among themselves. They had, abiding by the Islamic standards of declaring a product halal, and was primarily meat products, beef, chicken, and just basically meat products. And back in the day, I would say 20, 30 years ago, even 50 years ago, let's go back a little further, airline travel was not the way it is now. Back in those days, you couldn't get a product like overnight the way you can now. Now the situation has totally changed and has evolved. So you had a few Muslim countries that were supplying other Muslim countries, but the number of Muslims kept growing in the world, and the size of the Muslim population started growing. And then you started having airlines and even shipping to a certain extent were sending product around the world. And then and if you look at Dubai, look at the Dubai skyline, which you would have seen in my presentation, or the Saudi skyline, what you see are great big metropolitan areas. And those are big cities now. And you look around, you travel around the Muslim world, you see relatively big populations with relatively advanced supermarkets, restaurants, etc. So you can't think of like a little lazy town or a little small city. Everything is now very modern, and trade is done on you can get a product from United States to Dubai literally overnight, just as long as it take a plane ride, 14-hour flight from here to there. So the situation has changed. So what has happened is, and I think the chairman of Senate mentioned it. He said in the 1970s, if I heard him correctly, there has started to be some standards set up for halal trade. And so those standards have evolved over time. And so most of the time you have a government organization, let's say, for example, in Dubai, you have the government organization that's overcharged of certifying, making certain that products coming to the country in the UAE are halal. And then you have, in the United States, you have the US government, and then you have halal certifiers. And the halal certifiers are normally organizations that, a lot of them were religious or Muslim organizations that over time became the certifiers. Like you have, I don't want to start naming any of the certifiers, but you have those organizations in the United States. So you have the regulations coming from, let's say, for example, the government of the UAE government, and then you have those, the US government, and the US government has tried its best not to get involved with the halal issue. It has issued a few small policies with respect to halal, but in general, they try not to get overly involved in the issue. And the certifiers now have to go through a process of getting certified. That whole situation with certification has impacted the trade of halal. Now, the point I wanted to make is about how halal has grown in terms of a market, a product, or a product type. And it's more than Muslims, because even though there are a lot of Muslims, about 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, halal is bigger than that, because in the United States, what you'll find is there are universities that have halal stations at the universities for Muslim students. There are halal stores in the United States that weren't even here 15, 20 years ago. There are halal restaurants that serve halal food. So and non-Muslims eat halal as well because they consider halal as a healthy alternative to a lot of other product that is on the market. So that has made the demand for halal products to grow exponentially. And so depending on who you talk to, the demand for halal halal products sales are over $1 trillion, depending on who does the calculation of how many halal products are out there. But I think there's a standard belief that the halal market now is around over $1 trillion per year, and that covers the meat products. And then there are other countries, Indonesia, and to some extent Malaysia, that they require certification. Oh, Indonesia, any food product exported to that country has to be certified halal. And that surprised me when I was talking to the agricultural counselor for the U.S. Embassy, and he told me that. He said all food products have to be certified halal. And I was sitting there trying to get my arms around that concept because they're importing millions and hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of food per year, and that everything had to be certified halal. So the whole halal issue over time has evolved. I could get into some more specifics in terms of what has happened in the UAE or what has happened in other parts of the world. But in general, the point is that the halal trade as a business has evolved from that little sleepy situation that we had 30, 40 years ago or 50 years ago to a vibrant business that is worldwide. And the big companies are in halal, like KFC. There are local companies that are actually in halal. The names of those companies, you would know all the names of the companies, but the big one that I'm thinking of that came to my mind is KFC, and then other companies as well. So the big multinational companies are involved in the halal sphere. And so with that said, and without my words in front of me, that is more or less just an introduction of the halal market, and I'll be happy to get into specifics later.
Thank you very much, Quentin. I think I have already a few questions, but I think we'll save them for later.
Good.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, so let me remind you folks who are listening and watching, please do send your questions, type your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them afterwards. And now I want to introduce our second speaker on this panel, who is Mayra Neguez. I hope I didn't mispronounce that with my Moroccan pronunciation.
That's fine.
I think you might be on mute. But
No.
Okay. So Mayra is the executive director at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And that is an organization that's dedicated to providing objective research and education about American Muslims to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. And that includes political decision-making. Mayra herself is responsible for the institution's overall leadership and strategy and growth. And before she joined ISPU, Mayra served as the Senior Program Officer for Marie Stopes International, which is a UK-based NGO that works in 42 countries. So Mayra, take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm not on mute. So
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, now.
Okay. Great. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's really, really nice to be here with you. I am also based in the DC area, but in DC, Washington, DC proper. So Quentin, we're sort of neighbors. And I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully this works. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes, we see yours.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Wonderful.
Perfect. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I do lead our team here at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and education organization that focuses solely on researching American Muslims and sort of the American context for Muslims. In short, what we do is we put relevant, rigorous research into the right hands. And today, all of you listening in are, in fact, those right hands. I'm going to be sharing some of our data from two of our research projects in particular. We have research on many, many topics, but the two I'm going to draw from today. One is our annual American Muslim poll. It is a survey of American faith groups, and we've done it every year for 5 years, so we have trend data at this point. I'm also going to share a few data points from our Muslims for American Progress project, and both can be found at www.ispu.org if you're interested in digging into the data a little bit more deeply. We are switching gears a little bit because ISPU does focus solely on the American context. So that's one thing we're sort of honing into the US context. And also we haven't done research specifically on the halal industry, but I teased out the data that I thought would be helpful to the halal industry and to business leaders in particular. If you forget everything I say today, there's sort of 4 key points that I am going to make. And these are the things that I hope you walk away with. One is that the American Muslim community is, in fact, the most diverse faith community in this country. And I think as an industry, when it comes to marketing and appealing across diversity and sort of geographic location, that needs to be taken into account. The second point I want to make is that Muslims really do face quite, steep and somewhat unique challenges, although they're intersectional with other vulnerable communities in our country. But there are unique challenges that Muslims face, and thus the halal industry faces too. And, that's just the context that halal businesses are operating in this country. The third point that I want to make is that despite these challenges, Muslims in America are a really important demographic when it comes to business, to employment, and to consumer spending. And the last thing I want to talk about is just, with challenges come opportunities. And one such opportunity is how business leaders can get involved in political engagement and sort of increasing the political engagement of Muslims in America. So I'll just dive right in. So to the first point, as I mentioned, Muslims are the most racially and ethnically diverse community in America. There is no majority ethnicity or race. Latino Muslims are the fastest growing population, currently at 8% of Muslims in America. Black Muslims are the plurality of Muslims in this country at 28% of Muslim communities. The vast majority of the rest are split between people who identify as either Arab or Asian or white. And there's a sizable, at 2%, it's a significant population of Native Americans who also identify as Muslim. And I think this is just really important to note as business leaders and as an industry, sort of this incredible diversity and diversity of experiences when it comes to sort of your products. One other thing to note, half of Muslims in America were born in America, half were born elsewhere, although almost 90% of Muslims now in America are in fact American citizens. To the second point, Muslims do face real challenges in America, and this affects the halal industry to some degree. The majority of Muslims in America do report experiencing some form of religious-based discrimination. 60% of Muslims, in fact, said they experienced this type of discrimination in the past year. And this has remained unchanged for 5 years. It has not gone up. It has not gone down. And many Muslims experience this type of discrimination in interpersonal relationships when interacting with people that they maybe don't know or that they do know, but just sort of person to person. The vast majority of this happens when interacting with strangers in public places, but this also happens at work, in school, and among family and friends. And to some degree, other American faith groups experience this as well, although not quite on the same scale as Muslims. But where Muslims really do sort of suffer a little bit more than their American counterparts of other faith groups is when it comes to institutional religious discrimination. So sort of systemic institutionalized discrimination. And this is where Muslims are kind of outliers. And this is most notable at the airport, you know, again, for halal industry who are coming in from outside, or even Muslims who are traveling to other countries and trying to come back to America. Almost half of Muslims who are entering our airports are, you know, getting discriminated against in some way. But this also happens when applying for a job, when interacting with law enforcement, and when seeking healthcare. Very unfortunately, Muslim children are not immune. In fact, Muslim families are twice as likely as the general public to say that their kids are experiencing bullying because of their faith. And this is affecting half of Muslim families. So when you look at this, it's really not surprising that the second line down, bigotry, civil liberties, racism, discrimination, this really rises to the top when you ask Muslims what are the political priorities for our elected officials. That is one thing that really, really rises to the top, and it's not surprising. But another thing that rises to the top is jobs and the economy, which is the same for most Americans. That rises to the top for everybody. So let's look a little bit about that, look into that a little bit deeper. Muslims in America are the most likely faith group to report low income. And again, this affects the halal industry, right? Just in terms of the economics of the Muslim community. 35% of Muslims in America live on less, or 35% of Muslim households rather, live on less than $30,000 per year. This is twice the sort of level of poverty as the general public in America. And Muslims are less likely to report high income. So they're more likely to report low income, and they're less likely to report higher income. So there's just less wealth in Muslim communities than there are in the American public more broadly. Having said that, though, Muslims are really key consumer spenders. In one study that we did looking at Muslims just in New York City alone, in 1 year, New York City's Muslims spent $17 billion in consumer spending. And this is actually 36% higher than the average consumer spending across sort of the general public in the United States. And the most notable areas where this spending was higher was in areas like education and philanthropy. We did a similar study in Michigan. And in Michigan, in 1 year, Muslims spent $5.5 billion. And again, that was 20% more than the average American household in consumer spending. And Muslim businesses play a really key role in the economy. In the study we did on New York City, Muslims owned almost 100,000 businesses. I'm sure that many of those were halal businesses. And they employed more than 250,000 people. And the halal industry is just interesting. This is one little tidbit that we learned when we were doing this study, is that the New York City food carts are a really interesting sector because they started off mostly by Jewish sort of immigrants from places like Poland who were selling pickles on the corner. And now 57% of food carts in New York City, which are like a landmark staple of what it looks like in New York City, 57% of food carts in the city are owned by Muslims. And this is really interconnected with the taxi system. So 39% of taxi drivers in New York City are Muslim. And the name Mohammed is the most common name for registered taxi drivers. And so there's this sort of inner dynamic between taxi drivers needing halal food and needing a quick place to stop, and this growth in the halal market of food carts to be able to service the taxi drivers. Some of you may know the Halal guys who rose from one of these chicken and rice on the corner places to a national brand. Now, the last point I wanted to make is that there are opportunities for business leaders to get involved and sort of support community development by getting politically engaged. And this is really important because Muslim voter registration in the United States lags way behind other groups. So of eligible Muslim voters in the United States, only 78% are registered to vote. And this is compared to almost 90% across every other group. Now, this has gone up in the 5 years we've been tracking. There were only 60% of eligible Muslim voters registered 5 years ago. That number has increased to 78%, so that is good. And we have closed the sort of inshallah voter gap. That is the gap between the people who intend to vote, which 5 years ago, that was 85% of people intended to vote, but were registered. So there was this sort of inshallah voter gap. That has largely closed now due to the incredible work by business leaders and other civic organizations. That is almost entirely closed. There are other ways that Muslims are getting involved in political engagement. One is attending town hall meetings. So Muslims are more likely than the general public and most other faith groups to attend a town hall meeting. And that is a really important way that people can engage. Another way is by volunteering for a political campaign. And Muslims, along with their Jewish counterparts, are the most likely faith groups and among the general public to volunteer for a political campaign. And Muslims are on par with the general public when it comes to giving political campaign contributions, and that's also another way that people can get involved. For those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about how business leaders might be able to dive deeper into this, we're soon coming out with a case study that looks at a group of businessmen or business leaders, in Virginia, and how they came together, created a chamber of commerce, and over the past couple of years have made enormous strides in increasing political engagement, working with political candidates, and all kinds of things. It's a really fascinating case study on how to go about doing that as a business leader. So if you're interested in that, you can either sign up for our newsletter at isq.org or just check on our website in a month or so. It should be published. So again, this is my summary. Muslims are incredibly diverse. Muslims do face really unique challenges in America, but with these challenges come great opportunities. So I will leave it there, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Cool. Thank you very much, Myra. That was incredibly informative and really some interesting statistics I would not have actually thought about. So that was a lot easier than reading the results of the poll.
Yes, you got to tease out what's relevant, right?
Yes, exactly. And thank you for doing that because it's absolutely spot on. So let me remind our folks who are looking in, watching in, send us your questions in the chat. So I will be sure and raise them. And while we're waiting for your questions, because I don't think there are any yet, let me ask a couple of things. It's sort of hard to know where to start because the topics are so interrelated. I'm really interested in the intersection of business and sort of the Islamophobia end of things and how business can help in trying to diminish the kind of increase that we've seen in the last 4 years. I won't even get into the election yet. That I'll probably be talking about that later on. But but where we are now, it just seems to me that as people can understand the notion of halal better, and not have these sorts of crazy ideas that that somehow it's not healthy, somehow it's weird, somehow it's just not what you want to do. I think that should be helping also in the larger sort of picture of increasing the understanding and tolerance of Muslims in general. Have any comments on that? Quentin?
Yeah, that's very interesting because I don't think about it that much in terms of the experience that I have through other business people that I've talked to is that halal as a product is being more widely accepted. and I would take my visit when a couple of years ago to University of Chicago. I was fortunate enough to be invited to speak at a halal conference. And then one of the panelists on the conference was the or in charge of the cafeteria and the eating facility at the University of Chicago. So he invited me to take a tour of the university's facilities. And I got a behind the scenes look at the halal station, and then also a behind the look at the kosher station at the same time. And what I learned is that students, when they want food, they're not concerned so much that it's halal. They're concerned that it tastes good, number one. And then they think it, for whatever reason, they believe it's healthier than the normal fare that's being served at the school. I believe that halal is growing, and my numbers and graphs show that any discrimination against halal is very much getting evaporated very fast. And you'll see the trend lines are very positive in terms of trade in the United States and overseas. So I think that whatever I would say anti-halal or anti-Muslim sentiments are out there, it's not reflected in the trade numbers because they keep going up.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think if you look at the experience of the food carts in New York City, they're so mainstreamed, right? I mean, they all say halal on them. They're all very obvious, or most of them are, very obviously halal food. But if you look at the lines of people waiting to purchase the food, they come from all walks of life, all types of people. And I think, it's really just about appealing with the products. And once people think the food tastes good or it's convenient or for whatever reason, they're choosing that, any kind of concern strips away. And maybe on the flip side, Elizabeth, I think your question maybe also is alluding to if halal brands or if the halal industry becomes more mainstreamed, will that in turn affect Islamophobia in other ways? And I think, we don't have any research on this, but my own anecdotal thoughts are that, yes, it should. If you think about kosher food has become so normal, right? It's so mainstream. You go into a supermarket and lots of things have like a kosher label on them, and you don't even think twice. You're not like, oh, I can't buy that because it's not for me. I don't even think people notice that anymore. They just want to buy good products, and it definitely does, I would think, affect the way they think about that group of people that produces that product.
I think just to piggyback on that, the majority of people who eat kosher food are not Jewish. They're non-Jewish. Mm-hmm. And I think that what's going to happen and what's happening with halal is that halal is going to see the same growth. It's going to be eaten more by people who are not Muslims than Muslim. Well, there's a large Muslim population in the world, but we see the trend line is that a lot of non-Muslims are eating halal food. As long as I said it tastes good and they perceive it as being a higher quality, those two things are very important. And that's what I'm seeing out here right now.
It's the comparison of Jewish food takes me back to when I lived in New York. I went to school in New York for university, and my staple for street food when I had nothing but 75 cents in my pocket was a knish.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that brings back memories. We do have a question here from Ade Innes King, who is in Trinidad and Tobago. And the question here is, what's the best way for me to get started on getting my products halal certified so that I can begin exporting to countries like Indonesia? Well, let me just say we do have a panel coming up on certification, so we can perhaps address something a little bit here, but you might re-ask your question in that panel as well. So Quentin, any ideas?
Yeah, sure. I do have ideas. First of all, the certification issue is something that I was intimately involved in the UAE. So I don't know how someone in Trinidad and Tobago approaches this, but I know how if I were advising a US company, I specifically tell them what to do. And maybe you can find the same parallel in Trinidad and Tobago. I would tell them, first of all, they need to understand what the importing country's regulations are. And in the United States, that's easy, relatively easy. You can go to the US Department of Agriculture, at least you used to be able to do it. Things have changed a little bit. But you used to be able to go to the US Department of Agriculture website, and it would tell you what the import regulations for Saudi Arabia are, what they are for the UAE, et cetera, et cetera. Short of that, then you would have to go, if you're in Trinidad and Tobago, if your government doesn't offer that information, then you can go directly to a website of the importing country and find out, just, you know, Google halal or whatever for that country. You will run into the organizations that control or that are in charge of certifying or making certain the product comes in the country as halal. And then from there, you have to understand what the import requirements are in that country. And then you will have to see what certifications they ask for from your government, from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And then you can see how you can get your product in line with what the importing country is asking for. That's sort of a convoluted answer, but it's going to work that way. And anytime you want to get a product into another country, you have to make certain you're abiding by their regulations.
I have a question for both the speakers. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
I just realized that my background is backward. Is it backward on yours?
No.
Oh, sorry for me. Okay.
I would have told you, Marwan. I would have told you.
So, hey. So, very good presentation. You know, Quentin gave us a scope on the international aspect of halal, and Myra on the domestic and the research. That was amazing, both of you. Quentin, can you tell us what your prediction on the growth of halal market globally, because you work with many international companies and also domestic? That's my question to you. And to Myra, can you share your presentation, because people are asking for it? If you can email it to us and make it available, it has very important information. My question to you is, you mentioned the elections. How do you think the elections will impact the halal market in the US from your research point of view, not political, or because I know you're nonprofit, but as an outcome, either way, do you see it going in a good direction or not in a good direction?
I think it's really hard to say, actually, and I say that because the economics, you know, we've been tracking a lot of what I shared for 5 years, data on Islamophobia, data on political engagement, data on economics of Muslim communities in the United States, and they've remained largely unchanged except for increased political engagement. That's really the only thing we've noticed that has like greatly changed in 5 years. So, you know, the less wealth in Muslim communities, for example, is not going to change significantly in the short term, right? That's a long term. I feel like a lot of the challenges that we research are very long-term challenges. So I don't know, you know, how much this particular election is going to affect the halal industry. I really don't know.
Well, you know, as a former U.S. diplomat, I've been trained not to talk about politics in public, but I'm going to talk a little bit now since I don't work for the government any longer.
There we go.
I actually don't think it's going to have that big of an impact either way, whether you know, former Vice President Biden wins or whether President Trump remains in office. I don't think it's going to change that much, because I think that the momentum of the halal trade right now is so strong in a positive direction. And I don't think that that's going to change depending on the party that's in power.
Thank you, Quinn.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I think we have a question here. Yes, so Brad LaRue, I'm not sure where he's coming in from. He says, I'm a non-Muslim and joined to learn more about halal food products and the culture in general. Thanks for allowing me to participate. What percentage of Muslims eat halal food products? What are the roadblocks for Muslims that may want to eat halal food products but don't on a regular basis?
That's a
Thank you for answering that one.
all I can say from our end is this is research that we really, really want to do. So if anyone out there wants to support this type of research, it is definitely on our radar, because I think these questions need to be asked if they haven't already. We haven't seen much data on this. So yeah, it's something we would love to do. So Quentin, I don't know if you know more.
Well, I don't have a number or percentage, but I can tell you this, that you would think that all Jewish people eat kosher, and that's not true. I've done a little bit of research on that, and there is a sizable percentage that do not eat kosher food. But what I can tell you is this, is that Muslims that I have, and I'm a non-Muslim, but Muslims that I've interacted with when they visit the United States, they ask, they say, can you tell me a restaurant that has halal food, or take me to a restaurant that has halal food? And in some cases you can, and in some cases you can't. So that's good research to be done. I think in general, when Muslims travel, they try to find halal food. And sometimes it's just not possible.
So let me add to Myra what she ended up with about research that need to be done. And we are working with ISPU and to initiate and start that kind of research on the halal market in the US. We're just waiting for donations to support it, and this will be under the American Halal Council. So we're ready to go. We're just looking for support from organizations, companies, like many are here today, and individuals who want to see these numbers. And we already created the parameters. It's going to take 9 months to conduct. It will cover Muslims and non-Muslims consumers of halal in the US. And I believe we're going to have amazing results and numbers. It's going to benefit many companies. It's going to benefit many organizations. It's going to benefit our government in the US. So let's do it. We need your support. Go to AmericanHalalCouncil.org and contribute to that research. It's ready to go.
We have 1 more minute. I don't want to go over time, but there is another question. It was to do with sensitization, but I think that's going to be part of the research. I think part of sensitizing people is showing them the numbers and educating them. So unless anybody wants to address that question about sensitization. No. Okay. So we have come to the end of our session. There is actually another question, but I think we can probably address this in another panel. So thank you to our amazing speakers, Myra Neguez and Quentin Gray, and thanks for popping in, Marwan. I want to just make a couple of announcements. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, sorry, bore you every time, but with this virtual format, we have to do this, to invite you all to stop by the Expo and visit the vendors who are there waiting for you, available, some of them live to talk. Also take advantage of the networking area to meet in groups or one-on-one. It's under the People tab on the right. And then please be sure to stick around to the end of the summit and join us at the awards ceremony to find out who is going to win the best halal product Best Halal Service, and Best Halal Innovation Award. So our next panel, oh, and one more thing. On the right also, you'll see there's a tab called Polls. There are questions in that poll tab that we would love it if you would take a look and answer them. We want your opinion on critical issues with respect to the halal industry and research and a lot of other things. So the next panel, which is Why Can't Muslims Agree on Halal Standards, will happen in 9 minutes. And just click on the session for that panel at, it's 5 o'clock my time. That means it's 12 o'clock your time. And we'll see you in 9 minutes. And thank you very much to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.